All right, this is the July 2nd, 2024 meeting of the Node.js Loaders team. And I have to get the YouTube link in here. Won't copy for me. All right, so on the agenda, we have various open open PRs for design documents, and we have a new issue opened yesterday about experimental TypeScript support. Does anyone have a preference for the order of discussing stuff?
Loaders will probably go long. Well, the hooks discussions will probably go long. So if the TypeScript one is shortish, probably it goes first.
All right, we can start with that. So yeah, Marco, I already commented on the issue. I was just thinking that like I like what makes sense to me to ship in Node Core is just type stripping, like some of the other runtimes do. I mean, I think some of the runtimes go beyond that a little bit. Like I think Bun might support paths. Um, Personally, I feel like we're not going to want to grow this feature to support like the tsconfig file and the stuff that's in there. And it's been a longstanding concern about how TypeScript is not Semver compliant, and like each minor version of TypeScript has breaking changes. And so we definitely want to avoid supporting any type of feature in TypeScript that the particular version of TypeScript matters. So TypeScript, if we limit our scope to type stripping, then we do avoid that problem. And if we, leave tsconfig out of it, we also avoid that problem. I guess the question then is like, is that going to be good enough for users? Like, because the other main alternative is what Matteo proposed of like basically like the first time someone runs it's like node file.ts, guide them into installing some user library that will like make that work essentially, or even do it automatically or something to that effect. And Jacob did a bunch of work last year about sketching out what that would look like. We could also do both, where like we do type stripping as a built-in feature and also somehow have support for guiding users to like adding more sophisticated support for TypeScript as like as a user dependency. So.
Yeah, so just for a little background, so my idea started with I had a look at what Dino was doing. So they don't do any type checking unless you pass a flag that is dash dash check. But we don't care about that. We would just support type stripping. But for the time being, I don't plan to add other flavors of like I don't care about TSX or um, like I just want something extremely simple, run very like perform type stripping on a .ts file, and that's why I think SWC with WASM is acceptable because it's very small. The actual PR to support all of it is like very few files. We don't add a full type system, and since we don't plan on implementing type checking at all, there is no need for like a big library like TSC. So my idea, like the way I implemented, is to basically whenever we find a file that has the extension .ts, we load, like we register a loader that basically performs the type stripping, and it outputs a ESM module. That's right now is not configurable, but it can be configured. So for example, you might choose the kind of the version of ES module that you want. I've set it to ES next. For example, you could support source maps. It's already provided by SWC. It does a lot of stuff. It does minification. It does many things that we theoretically might support or not, but that doesn't matter. So I just wanted to double check with the team to like ask you to have a look at the proposal and the PR and give it a review before it goes public.
Yeah, Changzong?
Yeah, I'm a little bit curious. Do we have any buy-in from the TypeScript team? Because from what I can tell, the TypeScript syntax is a little bit leaving standards. Well, no standards at all, because TypeScript team decides what they ship with the syntax. So I'm a little bit concerned that if we are going to integrate SWC without TypeScript team buy-in, then we might be in a situation where TypeScript ships new syntax where we didn't support, and SWC is going to be a little bit lagging with the support from new TypeScript versions and syntaxes.
So to answer this, I've pinged the maintainer of SWC and is supportive. But like, if there is a breaking change in TypeScript that like they implemented something new in the syntax that actually breaks the type stripping, I don't think that's extremely common, but it could happen. So we might be stuck to a TypeScript version and have to wait to SWC to update. That's the but like given that other runtimes have done it successfully, I don't think it's a huge problem.
Could we maybe? So my concern with calling the flag experimental TypeScript was that like it almost implies that we're supporting everything that TypeScript supports when like we explicitly would not be. Like we're not going to support enums, for example, because that's a transform. That's not just stripping. So what if we don't frame this as supporting TypeScript? We frame it as supporting that type annotations proposal that's in front of TC39. That's specifically around literally stripping types and nothing more. And then like we could call it experimental type annotations, say, I don't know, whatever you want to, whatever makes sense to you, but like as a way of making it very clear like what our scope is to users so that they don't just immediately say, well, my enums don't work, my paths don't work, my, you know, this and that don't work, and that we're not planning to add them, you know.
Yeah,
But do we?
agreed that
Yeah, sorry.
pure stripping doesn't work with enums in TypeScript.
I mean, we could strip them out if the code still functions with it just deleted, but like an enum is a transform. Like if you use the enum keyword in TypeScript, it's like gonna create new JavaScript code there. That's like, it's gonna create an object with a particular name, and then that object will have keys that match the enums, and then those get referenced later on in the code. There's a bunch of things like that in TypeScript. Like some of the earliest days of TypeScript had transforms like that, like similar to the kind of stuff that CoffeeScript used to do back in the day before, you know, before fat arrow functions existed, before classes existed. TypeScript had keywords for those or syntax for those that got transformed into other JavaScript. So TypeScript has a handful of those too. And those would just be explicitly not supported because you can't simply strip those out and have the code still work. It's like if you have this in there, you can't run this. This is like enhanced TypeScript, you know, it's not just type annotations, it's type annotations with transforms is what you've written. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've written a test to check enums. So if you want to have a look on how enums are, like the type stripping is performed, there is a test on that.
Well, but that's the thing I'm saying is that they shouldn't work. Because if they do work, then that's SWC doing a transform and not just stripping. And then we run into the issue of like that transform might change over time between different versions of TypeScript. You know what I mean? Like that's like how one of the other things that TypeScript does is it transpiles ESM into CommonJS, and we don't want to be doing that. You know, like I think if we could stay out of that game, like decorators, enums, transpilation, there's probably a few more. If we could just like put those as off limits where they error, then we stay in the focus of like only the stuff that the type annotations proposal supports. Then if that proposal ever graduates to stage 3 or 4, then V8 supports it, and then we can just drop all this and let V8 handle this for us. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, talking about the type annotation proposal in TC39, I would like to mention that the champion of the proposal, one of the champion with the proposal, who is Rob Palmer from Bloomberg, my colleague would have mentioned it to me that TypeScript team has expressed the interest to ship to early experiment type annotation proposal in Node, but I think it will be good to talk to the TypeScript team and the champions of the type annotation proposals to see what we can do to ship the minimum syntax in Node.
Joey?
I have a question. Why can't we go with the Undici approach with this? Because as far as I can tell, this can be implemented as a userland loader. I mean, at least at the initial development phase.
I mean, SWC is already used in userland a lot.
Yes, but we can also like, it can be a userland loader, basically similar to TSX, and like you can advertise this is going to be the next, well, we were thinking about including it in Node, but currently it's being developed as a userland loader because it's not complete. And also, this allows you to do a faster release cycle and probably also works in older release lines without doing all those backports. You don't want to keep backporting bug fixes when it's very different from the main branch.
I don't know how I feel towards that. I probably would not be interested in maintaining an external library and go through the full because it gets frustrating. It requires very, very long commitment. So I don't know if I would be interested. If someone else is, then sounds good to me.
I'm worried that this would send kind of the wrong signal that Node is shipping a loader that's incomplete, which makes it worse than the existing loaders. That kind of like sends the wrong signal, and people will be trying this and then seeing that it's actually worse. It would be better to like ship something that's more feature complete. And before that, it can live in NPM and get some tested, like early testing, and get better release cycles, because most people do not use the current release. It's like you can only get like, I don't know, 2% of the user base using the current release. Most people don't use that.
I guess it's actually more on like if we actually present this as experimental type stripping, then it makes sense. Then it's something more experimental and more with less featured than a TypeScript, like just a TypeScript loader. Does it make sense to you? Like if we say, hey, we want to support type stripping, and we don't say we just want to support TypeScript, then it's something that is more, it's like a bigger scope and it makes sense for it to be like less feature complete at the beginning. I don't know if like you get what I'm trying to.
Okay, so you're aiming for a, just stripping, not actually just like, I think that would, that's like a valid goal, but then it doesn't really it's not really in conflict with, doing it outside of core first until it matures and you bring in core, which is what
I mean,
Vinci does.
especially if it's just using the module customization hooks, then it could absolutely be implemented easily outside of core. I feel like the the reason to put this in core would be if we were using like the Rust version of SWC, and then we could build up the tool chain to compile that to C++ and have it be part of core and run fast everywhere. And then also, like, it could be implemented the same way we have support for all the current module types, like WASM and JSON and so on, where those aren't like registered through the hooks. Those are just like built into Node Core, and this could be just as fast as those are.
Yeah, I mean,
Like to
I
me,
agree
that would
that
be
you
the reason to
can-
put it in core, but
Yeah, I agree. That would be like when you actually have Rust integration, that would be the point where it can go in core. But like right now, it doesn't. So there really isn't like I see more cons than pros to put it in core because you're going to ship it in the current release and nobody uses the current release. And the release cycle is going to be coupled with the current release cycle, which is not nice for something that's like an experiment.
so I want to try to move on to the other topics. Maybe Marco, do you wanna, or Shangzong, do you wanna set up a meeting with those other type annotations people? And
Yeah,
that could be that could be the next step.
yeah, I'd be happy to set up a meeting to connect us with the champions and TypeScript team of the proposal, so that we to see what we can, like say, discuss about the minimum syntax to support in Node.js.
Does that work for you, Marco?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Like I just don't want this to go like extremely long, because I don't like, if it's something that we're not interested in doing, I will not continue putting effort into it. Like if it's something that, okay, we don't want this in core, then there is no reason for me to put effort into it. But if there is we want this feature, then we can make it happen. Like this is why I opened this PR with very little features, just to understand if there is people blocking, because otherwise we would go into the usual endless discussions that happens, and and I don't want to go into that. So I just want something very small, see if there is consensus. If not, don't go ahead with it.
To clarify, I'm not against adding it into core, but I think it should be in core in the Undici style, not in the test runner style, which is like you have a package first and it matures. And when it matures and you actually have something that make it make sense to be in core, like you have proper Rust integration, that's the point when you bring in core, not just like starting from scratch in core. That's not really a good pattern, in my opinion.
But this is different, because users in this case, they just want the developer experience of doing Node file TS, because otherwise there is plenty of other loaders that work perfectly. Like you don't really need this. And the reason why I think it doesn't landed yet in core is because like there is better alternatives outside. But since like this is something that, in my opinion, it would make sense, and it's something that I would like to see it growing at some point become like try to level the difference in developer experience with other runtimes. I think it makes sense to add it in core rather than something external. This is the only reason, because otherwise I think that there are much better loader outside, like I just use TSX or SWC directly. Like there is no point in adding another one.
Yeah, I don't think the limited goal is a problem. It's more like it's immature. Currently, it's immature because you have no user feedback.
Yeah.
And like even with a limited goal, I think like maybe the time it needs to live outside of core will be very short, but still, I think I would prefer to see it like have some user feedback in the user land first without having to couple with the current release cycle.
All right, we're halfway through the meeting, so we really should move on to the other topics. So we have the open PRs, the synchronous hooks proposal, Joy's, which is 198. There are most of the notes seem to be resolved. There are the few that are outstanding involve the link hook and the stuff about preloading children or like register versus register hooks. Do we want to, do we think that we could try to get to a resolution for either of those today? Or at least make progress?
One thing that I might be able to do is just give a little bit of context, because I realize I've been coming into a lot of the discussions on this, without actually, sharing a lot of the context for the arguments that I've been making and the kind of directions that I'm coming from. So I could try and give like a 5-minute update on the module harmony effort at TC39 and the parts that are relevant to loaders, if that's deemed relevant for this discussion, and if it helps give some background or thoughts. I could also do it another time if we don't have enough time for it today.
I think if it helps clarify the register versus register hooks question, then yes, or maybe the shortest version that touches just on that point directly.
Okay. Yeah, so for those who aren't aware,
Thank you, Marco.
Of the module harmony effort, it's a set of TC39 proposals that are aiming to improve the functionality of ES modules and fix a lot of the disparities that we have for CommonJS. I think we're overall working on very similar goals, just at a sort of a TC39 standards direction, where we're sort of, if you think of things like deferred imports, bringing the sort of lazy require pattern for lazy loading that we had for CommonJS to ES modules. Some of the other module harmony proposals include things like getting to module expressions and module declaration, so we can have native bundling for ES modules. And the proposal that I'm working on right now predominantly is a proposal for a JavaScript module source. So something like vm.sourceText module record. I just posted it in the chat. That'll reflect a source text module, and this went to but without it having any linkage or mutable state. And so it's purely a compiled source text that can be used to construct modules. So it's in a sense no different to having the source string, but it allows us to avoid adding a new eval capability into the language, which we would otherwise need if we were going to support creating modules from source strings. And because you can obtain it statically through the module system, we're able to ensure things like content security policy and capability sort of models can be applied to this. The use case that this proposal is currently chasing after is to support a better worker instantiation workflow, so that you could import this thing statically, and whether you're in the browser or Node.js, you can pass it into a worker. And obviously there's differences with Node workers, but hopefully the goal is to get us to a place where tools can understand where workers are being instantiated. And if a tool can understand where that worker is, it can analyze that code and see what workers are doing. And it can also bundle code that uses workers. And the hope is that that makes it easier to write libraries that use workers on the webs, because today you have to work out where the absolute path is, and that friction like possibly stops a lot of libraries from actually using workers more widely on the web and other environments. And I'm aiming to present to the HTML spec meeting soon on this proposal and this worker use case, and to also propose a import map option when creating a worker in a browser, because currently in the browser, whenever you construct a worker, it does not share the main resolution as the main thread. And so you get a different resolution, a new fresh resolution environment inside of the worker. And so the idea is that you could do something like this, and pass an import. Sorry about the background noise. I don't know if the noise cancellation is getting in. That you could do something like this when creating a worker in the browser, and you would get some kind of import map inheritance. And then also, ideally, to discuss making this the default when we use the source phase. So you could do something like import source my module from mod.js, and then just do new worker my module. And my hope, what I would like to try and achieve, if possible, and it might not be possible, but what I'm trying to suggest is that we could set some defaults when passing the special object, because it's not just a string path to the worker. We're passing something that we know is a module, so we can automatically infer type module. And I'm hopeful that we can automatically infer import map inherit. And so the ideal there is that if we can get to like a simpler worker instantiation workflow, it's slightly more ergonomic, and that would align better with Node.js today, where inside of a worker, you can import anything in Node modules. Whereas in a browser, if you've got an import map, the equivalent of bare specifier mappings, you can't import those bare specifiers inside of a worker context. And then there's lots of technicalities around how these objects transfer and behave in various workflows. And so the motivations and the reasons why I'm suggesting thinking about workers as first class is because a lot of the invariants that we have to maintain across contexts, for tooling, etc., simplify hugely if we can treat a compartment or a resolution environment as existing across worker boundaries. Not like that there shouldn't be customization, but that the default behavior of resolution information being shared across these boundaries and behaviors being shared across these boundaries will enable better static analysis and ergonomics for worker usage in line with what we're doing here and align with a lot of this work. Now, I understand that's all, hypothetical so far as it's not specified, but also we have, I guess, reached points where things are getting specified quite quickly now, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to get to a point where module declarations are being specified later this year. And so these kind of module harmony proposals, I think, do have an impact on what Node.js Loaders are doing. It would be great if we would already start to think about how loader hooks would work with things like sources, and have a little bit more engagement with the standards. As someone who represents the OpenJS Foundation at TC39, I've tried to share this work at previous collaborator summits, but I know I have dropped the communication on that quite a bit. So yeah, if there's more interest in what these proposals are doing and how they relate to Node.js, I can give a more in-depth summary at future meetings if folks are interested in. It hasn't been clear to me how best to communicate a lot of these features within the Node.js project, and it's been difficult to know who would be interested in that. But at least in these discussions, it feels like we're working on a lot of the same things, just on a timescale difference of like 1 year or 2 years, which isn't much if you think about it in Node.js release terms. Yeah, not a very technical argument, but the best I can do in 6 minutes, I guess. So if there's any further questions about that or how these proposals relate more specifically, I'm happy to discuss them. But otherwise, maybe that just helps give some background about, you know, the where I'm coming up for the overall motivation on the worker stuff, and then we can actually just go back to discussing the exact proposals and features as well. So I'm happy to follow on either way.
So it seems to me like, okay, you're trying to make the workers easier to instantiate and more flexible. I guess the thing that, so like the recent whole brouhaha with the off-thread loaders and trying to make one hooks thread made me aware of the expectation that many people have of each worker being very isolated from any other. To the point where like I'm wondering why we even like automatically pass down exec RV. Like it almost feels like you should have to be explicit that you want the worker to use arguments from the parent process, especially when an argument is like dash dash import or dash dash require. And so I don't know if like say it was possible to do register hooks where you pass in the function and somehow we could serialize that and put that in the worker through some magic, which I assume is not possible. But like, even if it was, I feel like there would be people who would object to that because they would be like, oh, no, you should need to be explicit about what gets run in a worker because it's supposed to be isolated by default. I mean, is that is that an accurate understanding of like the consensus of the project or the near consensus of the project? Or do you think that there are more people who feel the other way, that like workers should inherit whatever's going on in the main process by default, whether it's flags or registered hooks?
Yeah, I think like I completely understand that in the use case of replacing monkey patching, providing an API that, you know, is an easy API to migrate to makes sense. And in worker instantiations, flexibility makes sense. Users should be able to achieve their use cases. They should be able to customize their applications. But I guess the other perspective here is that like, if you want to pass your code to a bundler or an analysis tool, like Versal's NFT that is terribly named, what was named before NFTs got popular, but you know, analyze the graph and know what's being loaded where. Like having static guarantees around what code is loaded where is very important for security and bundlers and any type of analysis tooling. And as soon as you allow arbitrary customizations at arbitrary times, and you allow workers to be instantiated with custom things at arbitrary times, like anything's possible. And it's a sort of like the standard trade-off between like JavaScript full customizability and monkey patching and changing the built-ins and doing whatever you want to the environment, and like being able to reason about code bases as a whole. And so it's a very relevant and very deep discussion about the future of JavaScript in a lot of ways. Joey.
I think for Node, the ship has sailed that you're just allowed to do whatever in Node. At least that's like, as far as Node API is concerned, because you can do way more terrible stuff than running arbitrary code. You can process DR open. You can spawn child processes and do whatever. And the frame model kind of like already explicitly like did a disclaimer that we'll just allow, like we'll just trust any code that you ask us to run. So as far as like a Node API is concerned, that thing is kind of already like not really a thing. I can understand in browsers there are obviously different, you have different boundaries because you're supposed to run untrusted code. But in a Node API, that's not really a concern because that's like the whole thread model is built upon that. That you're allowed to patch whatever, you're allowed to run whatever that your operating system is providing. Because otherwise we'll need to change our thread model, and that would be like a very risky thing to do in terms of like security triaging and stuff.
Joey, what do you think about the question I was asking of like, are people expecting workers to inherit properties of the parent process, or is the expectation more the reverse?
I think someone in the thread mentioned something that like both the library and the user should have choices. Like they should be allowed to have like participate in the decision regarding whether they should be there is some code that should be registered, and they should be able to like have a way to modify this behavior either as a hot patch or as a way to like deal with known category of things that you're not supposed to run in this worker.
I mean, let me put it this way. Like, I'm just thinking. So I think like the use case that I have in mind is like the primary one we want to support is like if it's like say TypeScript support, right? And we want the user wants to be able to write TypeScript for all their files, including their worker files. And they don't want to have to like every time they write new worker, they don't want to have to add anything to that to like make the TypeScript support pass down to those files. And they get this today already if they run their app with node -- import TypeScript, whatever their TypeScript library is. And so it's the users that can't do that are the ones that like are using a bundler or some other reason why they can't do this through flags, so they want to do it through the register call at runtime. I think like something like the API that Joey has proposed, like if you're the author of such a TypeScript library, you could provide an API that's like initialize TypeScript support or whatever. And then so the user could import that from the library and run that like await import initialize TypeScript support that dead first in their file, no other static imports in their entry point, and there you go, it's registered before any child files have loaded. And like say we do Joey's proposal of the like whatever it's called process inherit in children within the library, the TypeScript library, that library author could both run register hooks to like add the hooks to the current thread and do the process, register for children or whatever it is to like say, and then do this again for any workers that are spawned. Would that be acceptable, Guy? Like what would be the downside of that, say? Because like that doesn't put any onus on the user to remember to do something. And both the library author and the user get control over whether a worker is spawned with stuff inherited or not. But the library author then gets the ability to like be like, yeah, like the user shouldn't need to remember to do anything to support workers. Like the library author, I mean, if the onus is on the library author to need to know about this API and use it to attach their thing to workers when they get spawned. But at least they're the most, that's at least the most proficient person to have to remember to do it,
I think like loader authors maybe won't think about workers that much. And so I guess the other side of the concern is kind of like a foot gun or usability concern, which is that do we put loader authors in a position in which they are by default, through no fault of their own, just because they don't understand the intricacies of the APIs, are shipping a subpar experience for workers, which puts Node.js applications in a position in which like they're not getting their metrics for all their workers or something. And maybe that's not so bad, but I guess on the API side, I still had some sort of clarifying questions there with regards to how those APIs work exactly. So if you register in children and you have a JavaScript file in which you add your hooks and then you call register in children against that module itself.
I think it's to be the same as if you had launched the app with -- import that file. Like it's just saying like run this file when a worker gets spawned.
But import will apply to all child work, all child processes spawned, right?
If you call it inside the same file, then it becomes recursive. Because whenever you spawn, like whenever you run this file, you're going to register it for all your children, then it's going to be recursive.
Because then each child that spawns is going to run that hooks file, register the hooks, and then call register again. And then any workers created there get 2 registrations, and then any workers created at another depth will get 3
Well, we
registrations.
could figure that that's just an implementation detail of making sure it's not running multiple times, but we could solve that.
Just stupid or something.
Guess if we key them on the URL, then it's probably fine because you can kind of like, you're only allowed to like preload this once. There's no such thing as like calling this multiple times and you want to run yourself multiple times. Like if you want to do that, doing a different file, I guess. I actually think in terms of like whether we should be using URL or functions, I think there's a different motivation of using URLs, which is for the hooks, you want to give them an identifier when you deregister them, or like if you're a third party and you want to figure out what this hook even is, then you want an identifier. And I guess there's no better identifier than URL other than maybe give it a custom ID, I guess, which is maybe less deterministic than the URL.
I mean, if we could somehow have, like, just because, like, say we keep the current register signature. We don't have to have that inherit to children if we really don't want to for some reason. Like there's nothing inherent about the current API that means it has to behave that way. We could decide whether or not we want that inheritability if people object to it. Or maybe we make an option in the options bag for register of inherit in children, and we could decide which way the default should be. I guess I feel like the only reason we haven't gone that way, Joey, you've been saying that keeping the current API is somehow an obstacle for people who are monkey patching to migrate. But I guess just to flip it around, is it so much? Like who would specifically have a lot of trouble migrating? Like is there an example of a particular library that you can think of, or particular pattern that would have trouble migrating to this?
What obstacle?
Yeah, like you were looking into like the top 30 monkey patching packages and stuff, and or all the ones that use pirates, etc. Like if we need to take an input of a URL instead of functions, then it's not like we can just update pirates and then everyone who is depending on pirates is automatically updated. It would be that like, pirates itself would have to change its public API, like a Semver major change, and then everyone depending on pirates would have to update to use that new API. So there'd be more of a friction that way, but also like where are these functions coming from? They're coming from a file. It's probably not that big of a, like we're not talking about make a major effort here to, instead of importing the function and then passing it to pirates, you just pass the file path that had that function to pirates,
Right, I think that would like guys showed some ideas to make it possible. I think I need to verify it, instead of just thinking that it might work, without actually like having some code that prove that it works. Like ideally with tests. But if that works, like if you can actually implement pirates or import in the middle, require in the middle on top of URL-based register, that will not be against. But I think the shared by workers by default, that needs more discussion because
I think
people
if we
think that
could,
would be surprising.
that's fine. I mean, I think though that if we can keep the current signature of the register method, then at least we have the option to make it shared with threads by default, or by opt-in, either way. But like, it's just not an option if it's
I'd be
register
happy
hooks, then it only takes functions.
to treat it as an opt-in option at registration time with deduping or something like that. So Yeah, I guess the main thing is just that whatever techniques we have for hooking, that like we've thought through the worker economics and we're happy with the decision we made about that. So that's the main thing.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
the shared the worker shared inheritance should probably come as a follow-up. I would prefer them to be opt-in instead of opt-out. Like we could do a similar major change to make them opt-out. But at least as far as how it currently goes, like making them shared by default will kind of like make the implementation complexity bigger from the start.
I would be fine with that. And if we did go entirely to a register-based API, then we could defer that discussion because we know that it's possible to do on a URL system, and we can add it later if we want. I think it's, but if we have the explicit hooks without a URL registration, and we're going to be not thinking about workers, then I guess that's where maybe we just need to make sure we're fully clarifying how we expect the workers cases to work out.
I'm favorable of changing it to URL as long as it can be, as long as we can migrate those packages on top of that. But I think having like being able to use that URL as an identifier is like convincing enough argument to like use the URL as the thing that you use to register. But I'm not sure about the worker boundary part because at least in my mental model, that doesn't really fit very well with the node security model.
Well, let's leave that for a follow-up then, like if we keep essentially the current register API that we have from import register from module. And it only affects the current thread for now, and then we can deal with, children as a follow-up or a new option to add or whatever. Is that possible?
That works.
Okay.
So yeah, if you're okay then, Joey, with updating your document, I think the only other open question was about the link hook, but I'm not even sure if this is really something that needs to be resolved in the document. This
It's
was
not going to
from,
be in the first pull request. I don't think so. But it will be kind of like a follow-up to verify that this idea can actually make importing the middle work.
I
I
guess,
am fairly sure that it can work, but I haven't really implemented it yet. It was like in my head.
okay, so the comments about link were from Guy and Shengzong. Oh, we're both still here. So I guess the question is like, can this proposal land as is with how it describes link, or is there more we need to work out about that hook before we at least land the design doc?
I think I agree that we can land in the design doc.
Yeah,
I mean, we could also just take out that section and then a follow-up design doc adds that hook. Because if it's not going to be part of the MVP, then we don't have to define it right now. But I mean, that's another option.
I guess I'm also kind of thinking ahead to like, I know it's not coming anytime soon, but like we are hoping eventually to have module instances at the TC39 level for fully spec compliant virtualization in the language. And the compartments proposal does have some proposals there, but they're not, it will take a while for those. So I guess the main piece of feedback I would just say is like, since vm.sourcetext module is experimental, if we could be clear that any link API is experimental as separate from stability of the main loader API, that could be useful.
So in the current hooks documentation, we've always been marking individual hooks at different stability levels. Like we got rid of the global preload hook, for example. Like that was a different stability level from resolve and load before we got rid of it. So we could certainly do that.
So I'd be happy with that, just as long as it has a status that matches the VM status. So
Okay, does that work for everybody else?
I guess
Yeah,
sorry, I think another way to like make it work without exposing VM module is that you have a link hook that's different from the low hook because it's at a different timing, but you expose the request to it. And it allows the hook to return a string, which is basically what the current hook does. And like maybe additional properties like source maps.
I mean, or Joyi, do you want to just, I mean, if you're gonna revise the end of the document anyway to get rid of the process, preload and children part, do you want to just get rid of the link part and then we'll do a new PR that adds it as a follow-up if you're not going to implement it in the first PR anyway?
I think it's fine to just like say some
Or just-
disclaimer at the top, like this is just proof of concept. It's not actually, what's going to be implemented. It's just like
Or at
address
least
this
just, or even
question.
just for that hook, because I think the other parts, resolve and load seem fine. If you update the part about register, that's probably fine. Like it's not very tentative at this point, since it's like we have this whole stuff practically working in the existing hooks API and you have your branch, so it's not very tentative at this point.
I mean, in terms of design doc, I'm not sure how like complete this. My idea about the design doc is like it's just like a document that explains how we explore the problem space. And it's worth documenting like the exploration, like even if it's not ending up as the final solution, at least you know that it's being explored, and instead of like, saying that, oh, well, think about it later. Because like
Well, but my only concern is I want this to be like a tool of reaching consensus. Like this document, when we land it, it's saying like, yeah, okay, when we landed this, we had consensus on this approach. Obviously it's not the final product is going to have differences from this, whatever, but at least like, at least at each step of the way, we had the consensus and people don't complain afterward that something didn't get talked about or discussed or no one was invited in the meetings and all that kind of stuff, So it sounds like we do have consensus, like if you make the changes we discussed today. So I'm okay with the link stuff landing. We can add a note about that hook being experimental, even in the design doc, I think is
like it's just a
fine.
disclaimer. It's just an exploration, proof of concept. Don't take it too seriously.
Sure. So yeah, I guess Joey, if you want to make those changes, then I would be happy to land this once those are done. And then we can
Okay,
move on to
update it,
the,
and I guess
and then
my
that would,
first thing to do is to make sure that I can actually implement, like verifying that the packages can actually implement with the URL-based approach.
okay.
I'll try to do something with my prototype to see if I can write a different test, like multiple different tests actually.
Okay. Well, once you do that, then that would resolve the issue that Guy opened, and then and then assuming that it works out the way we were hoping, then we can land your design doc. Then the next thing will be my design doc that just adds the start graph hook. So we're at time now, so maybe we can hopefully talk about that at the next meeting and maybe make some progress on that. Or if everyone just approves it, we could even land it before then, but I don't know if it's got consensus already. But does that work for everybody?
Sounds good to me.
All right,
Yeah, sounds good.
awesome. Is there anything else to cover today?
That's great. And just to say, hopefully I will try and join these meetings more in future and give updates on TC39 things and things I'm working on as part of OpenJS. Yeah, I'll aim to be better at that.
On that note, maybe you want to check out the standards position repository if you want like broader feedback from outside of this group.
Yeah, I've been following that as well. And yeah, certainly that's worth bearing in mind for proposals when they're in advancement processes. So yeah, definitely.